Alright, man, peace. So, brothers, I just wanted to add this little addendum, this little epilogue onto the video that I did about the top 50 NBA playoff performances of the last 40 years. Because as I stated in the main video, many of the Kobe Bryant fans, they get very upset with me when I state that Kobe Bryant is unequivocally the most overrated, all-time great player in NBA history. And as opposed to them concentrating on the portion of my statement where, indeed, I confirm that he is an all-time great, there's no doubt about that, for anyone to state that Kobe Bryant is anything but an all-time great, you'd have to be a damn fool. But he's also the most overrated all-time great player in the history of the NBA. Why is that? Because the NBA needed someone to replace Michael Jordan. And what a lot of people have a hard time distinguishing is in between the truth and narrative. The NBA, like all professional sports leagues, is an entertainment league. And all entertainment has to create a series of narratives to keep the viewers strung along. They have to keep you interested. So there always has to be a replacement. It's like when you go to a Broadway play, or if you're into musical theater. When you attend the show, you have the main actor or main actress. And when their run in that play ends, you have to have a replacement. With Dr. J, Michael Jordan was his replacement. With Michael Jordan, for those of you brothers who remember, throughout the early to mid-90s, they were trying to build up his replacement. And when Jordan was in his late 20s, he would get offended by it. Like I'm sure many of you brothers remember Harold Miner. He was a cat who came into the NBA, I believe, in 92. And Jordan was only 29 years old. They called him Baby Jordan. And Michael, of course, got very offended at the notion that the NBA had the nerve to bring in his replacement when he felt like he was in his prime. So he would always torch Harold Miner whenever they played. But after Jordan retired and then came back, he was ready to groom a replacement. So all throughout the mid-90s, the NBA went about trying to find Jordan's replacement. Was it Jerry Stackhouse? Was it Grant Hill? Was it Anthony Hardaway? Was it Kobe? Was it Vince Carter? All those guys' names got thrown into the hat, and they were all constantly being billed as the next Michael Jordan. And Kobe was pretty much the only guy left standing. And all throughout the late 90s into the early 2000s, it was mostly just Kobe and Vince Carter who were being billed as the next Michael Jordan. But Kobe had the whole package. He even had Michael Jordan's persona. Vince Carter never really wanted that pressure. So just to get back to the point, many brothers oftentimes have a hard time understanding when they've been put under mind control. And even many of Michael Jordan's detractors will make the point, or attempt to make the point, that Jordan, for the most part, was a product of media manipulation. I remember the Bad Boy Pistons used to like to make that point throughout the late 80s, early 90s, that Jordan had corporate sponsors pumping him up. Bill Laimbeer and Isaiah Thomas, they loved to make that statement about Michael Jordan. And that's why it hurt them both so much when a lot of the rhetoric that was being put forth about Jordan, the hype machine that was around Jordan, ended up not being hype, but ended up being very real. They both had to acquiesce to Jordan's greatness eventually because of the way that he was able to master the team game in the 90s, in the same way that he was able to master the individual game from the mid to late 80s. So of course that brings us to Kobe being Bryant. And the main way, the main mechanism around which the NBA was able to promote him was, look at Kobe. He walks like Michael. He talks like Michael. He tries to play like Michael. When Kobe first came into the NBA, he had the bald head. And then he tried to disassociate himself from being a carbon copy of Michael by going to the other extreme. He said, you know what, I don't want people to believe that I'm trying to be like Jordan, so I'm going to grow an afro. That's what I'm going to do. Not only am I not going to have a bald head, I'm going to grow an afro so that people can see that I'm totally disparate from Michael Jordan, even though his style of play was identical. And contrary to what many people understand, Jordan took Kobe Bryant under his wing behind the scenes and instructed him on how to dominate the game of basketball individually, how to attack defenses, And then later on in Kobe's career when he was ready. And then later on in Kobe's career when he was finally matured and ready, Jordan instructed him on how to lead a championship-level squad, which is a lot of the same information that Kobe now tries to ferry to LeBron James, even though the liberal sports media tries to stop him. I say all that to say this. This moniker that Kobe Bryant has as being this great playoff performer, he was more important to the championship Laker teams than Shaq was. All this nonsense that many of his fanboys like to promote on the internet. It's totally groundless and baseless. And that's why I found this article, which is going to diligently state the top playoff performances of the last 50 years. And Kobe Bryant's greatest playoff performance is accurately placed. And as I've been telling you, brothers, as long as I've had this channel now, Kobe Bryant's greatest playoff performance was the 2009 playoffs, when they were finally able to win the championship with him as the leader. They defeated the Orlando Magic in 5 games. And you'll see where his performance is accurately placed on this list to correctly convey exactly where he is as an all-time great. And let's pay very close attention to the names that are above him. So let's look at this article. It states here, ranking the 50 greatest individual postseasons in modern NBA history. As we can see, they have Michael Jordan, who's number 1 on my all-time list. LeBron James, who's tentatively ranked at number 6 on my all-time list. And Steph Curry, who I have not accurately placed him on my list because I haven't gone down that far. But he's most likely in the top 30 somewhere, all time. But now let's check what this article has to state. When it comes to historic player performances, the conference playoffs get no love. You can name and debate the best regular seasons and the best NBA Finals efforts, but the best overall postseason run doesn't spark the imagination quite the same way. The same is true in terms of awards. The best regular seasons are rewarded with the MVP, and there's an MVP of the NBA Finals. But save for the award Bill Simmons invented in the book of basketball, there's nothing to honor the best playoff runs, which is what brings us here. Using my wins above replacement player metric, we've ranked the best overall postseason performances dating to 1978, the first year the NBA tracked a full box score, including player turnovers. All right. Warp is up to task because it considers both quality and quantity of performance. For example, Tim Duncan was better on a per-minute basis in the 2007 playoffs when he had a 27.4 player efficiency rating than in 1999, 25.1. But the 23-year-old Duncan was able to log 43.1 minutes per game in the 1999 postseason, as opposed to a relatively cushy 36.8 minutes per game in 2007 when he was already 31. Those extra 6 minutes a game Duncan kept backup Will Perdue on the bench mattered to the San Antonio Spurs, and using Warp credits him for it. In other words, this metric that they're utilizing to determine the greatest NBA postseason performances of the last 40 years not only factors in stats, but also impact while on the floor, because what they're assuming is that due to your ability to log more minutes, it's also going to affect the overall team flow while you're on the floor, known as player impact. It's not just about what you do when you have the basketball. Just your presence on the basketball floor is going to positively affect your team. That's where a player like a Steph Curry is going to have his greatest overall impact in a stat like this when it's properly calibrated. But I'm not going to read all this. I already read the point in regards to how they're going to constitute this metric. Let's scroll down. So, of course, number 1 is Michael Jordan. I have no idea why they have a picture of LeBron James here. But the number 1 greatest playoff performance of the last 40 years, according to this metric, is Michael Jordan's first championship run in 1991. And for those of you brothers out there old enough to remember, this was Jordan at his apex as an athlete and as a player. I would really say he really hit his overall apex the next season when they beat Portland. But in 1991, that was probably him at his explosive best. 92 was when he started to fill out a little bit more, and he started to expand his range in regards to his jump shooting. But 91, he was just incredible. He dominated in the first round. They swept the New York Knicks. Game 3 in Madison Square Garden is when he had that unbelievable dunk over Patrick Ewing. And people may not remember this if you were not alive at that time, but in that game, Game 3, Patrick Ewing got dunked on multiple times. I think he got dunked on by Scottie Pippen twice in that game, and then Jordan finally got him. The second round, it was a 5-game series. Jordan was dominant against Charles Barkley and the Philadelphia 76ers. And then the third round, they swept the bad boy Pistons. Jordan's efficiency numbers, not just in the playoffs, but overall throughout that season and during that span in his career, unbelievable. No player has ever been more proficient and efficient than Michael Jordan. This was a guy averaging over 30 points per game at shooting guard and shooting well over 50%. In the 1991 regular season, he shot almost 54% at shooting guard. This is not LeBron James backing somebody down to the basket and getting a bunch of layups. It's a shooting guard playing in an era when you had a power forward and a center in the paint waiting for you to drive the basketball. Totally different level. But anyway, Michael Jordan, number 1 all-time greatest NBA playoffs performance in 1991. I concur. Says he was 28 years old. He averaged 31 points a game, 6 rebounds, 8 assists. 8 assists. As I've stated in other videos, Michael Jordan's passing was vastly underrated. He averaged 8 assists a game for the entire playoffs. In the finals, he almost averaged a triple-double against the LA Lakers. True shooting percentage, 60%. Wow. I'm not going to read all this. We already got the point. I already gave you my own synopsis. As we can see here, in the 5 games against the Lakers, he averaged 31.2 points a game, 11.4 assists. 11.4 assists at shooting guard, and 6.6 rebounds. Also, of course, was the best defender at his position during that entire era. Oh, let me read this last sentence. It says, the Bulls outscored their opponents by an average of 11.7 points, good for second in modern playoff history. I'm already on record as stating that the 91 Bulls are the most underrated NBA playoff team of all time. Number 2 is LeBron James, the Heat in 2012. As I've stated already in many of my videos, LeBron's Game 6 performance against the Bulls is one of the top 5 playoff performances that I've ever seen. Ever. Not even counting the pressure. But when you add the pressure in, it's probably top 3 all-time greatest playoff performances. I would have to sit down and truly think about what are the greatest playoff performances that I've ever seen. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm also thinking about Jordan's Game 4 in 1993 against the Knicks. The Bulls were down 2-1 in Chicago, and Jordan scored 54 points on that New York Knicks defense. But LeBron's performance in Game 6 against the Boston Celtics in Boston, unbelievable. So for those playoffs, LeBron averaged 30 a game, 9.7 rebounds, 5.6 assists. Yes, and LeBron was also great in that Pacers series. Yes, he was. He was great in that Pacers series. Let's see. Number 3, Tim Duncan. Most underrated player in the history of the NBA. Kobe Bryant is the most overrated all-time great player in the history of the NBA. Tim Duncan is the most underrated all-time great player in the history of the NBA. No doubt about it. He's number 9 or 10 on my top 10 list. You know, when you get down in that 8 to 10 range, I believe I have Shaq, Hakeem, and Tim Duncan. You could pretty much switch their slots depending on your personal preference. But all three of those players have to be in my top 10. No doubt about it. And as we can see, the great Tim Duncan here, all-time dominant power forward, non-pareil offensive and defensive impact player. In the 2003 postseason, he averaged almost 25 a game, over 15 rebounds a game, 5 assists at center. And this was the year that they ended the LA Lakers dynasty. In terms of raw playoff WARP, meaning wins above replacement, Duncan's 2003 playoff run tops the list because the Spurs, as noted in the introduction, needed 24 games to win the championship, playing exactly 6 games in every series. Don't blame Duncan. No superstar has done more to drag an undermanned team to the title. And that's another thing. Oftentimes people love to speak about how undermanned this player's team is or that player's team is. What great players do is they're able to make their teammates better in a team system. Tim Duncan could have said, you know what, just give me the basketball every time down. I'm going to average 35 and 20. We'll lose in 5 games and I'll claim I don't have any help. Instead, what he did was work alongside Popovich and make all his teammates better. That's what real leaders do. That's what great leaders do. Tim Duncan, pound for pound, inch for inch, is not as talented as LeBron James, but he's a much better leader. He's also a better leader than Kobe. People might not like me saying that, but it is what it is. He was able to work alongside Popovich, or maybe he was able to work for Popovich because he had the personality type to work for or with Greg Popovich. Kobe was always clashing with Phil Jackson and with the rest of his teammates. Doesn't mean that Kobe was not an all-time great player. He certainly was. But there's a major difference between Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan. Certain people will say, well, Kobe was able to knock Tim Duncan out of the playoffs. The Lakers only played Tim Duncan in the playoffs one time with Kobe as their best player. And that was in 2008. They were able to defeat the Spurs. I give Kobe credit for that. That was one of the best series victories of his career. Really second only to the Boston Celtics in the 2010 finals. But in the early 2000s, we know who the best player on the Lakers was. And that's Mr. Shaquille O'Neal. The 2003 Spurs were a team in transition with David Robinson on his farewell tour. And the backcourt of second-year point guard Tony Parker and rookie shooting guard Manu Ginobili yet to grow into co-stars. In the playoffs, Parker and a young Steven Jackson were the only other San Antonio players to average double figures. That's true, but you know what? In that era in playoff games, the first team to 90 would oftentimes win the game. 90 to 95 points could win you a playoff game in that era. Very, very defensive, bogged down era. Let's continue on. Number 4, Shaquille O'Neal. Oh, Kobe Bryant's sidekick. Number 4, Shaq for the Lakers in 2000. Shaq averaged almost 31 a game, over 15 rebounds. Damn. It says here, peak domination by the center who will call himself big champion for the first time at the end of this run, coming off a regular season in which he was one first-place vote away from a unanimous MVP. O'Neal extended his position atop the league over an even 1,000 playoff minutes, a career high and good for 9th in modern NBA history. His 15.4 rebounds per game ranked decimal points behind Duncan for the second highest post-merger total for anyone who reached the NBA Finals. And he grabbed better than 20% of all available rebounds, the best of his playoff career. I've never seen a player more dominant than Shaquille O'Neal was for about a 2-year stretch. 2000 and 2001, when Shaq was fully healthy, he was the most dominant player I've ever seen. When I say dominant, I mean just physically supreme and just showing superlative physical attributes over the competition. There was nothing that anyone could do. He used to throw Dikembe Mutombo and Rick Smits out of the way. the way in which he could physically impose his will upon Tim Duncan and David Robinson. There was a 3-year stretch where Tim Duncan was considered the top young player in the NBA. And every time he faced Shaq, it was like a man going against a boy. Like it truly was. It was like those old Wilt Chamberlain versus Bill Russell battles if Wilt Chamberlain was winning. Back in the 60s, Wilt Chamberlain would have 40 points and 25 rebounds, but they would always lose to Russell and the Celtics. In the early 2000s, Shaq would have 40 and 20 against Tim Duncan and David Robinson, and the Lakers would win. That's the difference. And for the Laker fans who try to push this nonsense about Shaq being the second best player on that team, once again, please look up who was the MVP of those NBA Finals victories from 2000 to 2002. The proof is in the pudding. Kobe knew it himself. That's why he ran Shaq out of town, because he understood that he would never get his just due, his full acclaim as an all-time great player, if he did not run Shaq out of town. So let's look here. Wow. O'Neal was particularly dominant coming off extended rest at the start of each series. In 4 game ones, he averaged 41.8 points per game on 60.7% shooting. Wow. Wow. Number 5, Michael Jordan and the Bulls in 1993. I think that this should have been a little higher. Honestly, I think this should have been number 2. I think that Jordan's 1991 playoffs should have been number 1. His 93 playoffs should have been number 2. And his 92 playoffs should have been number 3. That's just me. Let's see what he did. At age 30, he averaged 35.1 points per game, almost 7 rebounds, 6 assists. While the highest scoring of Jordan's 6 championship runs didn't produce the kind of iconic memories as other years, it was plenty productive. Well, speak for yourself. I thought there were a lot of iconic moments in the 93 playoff run. The 55-point game against the Phoenix Suns in Game 4 of the Finals. The Charles Smith game, Game 5 in New York, when Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, and Michael Jordan all were able to successfully get their hands on the basketball and block Charles Smith. One of the greatest playoff games I've ever seen. For those of you brothers who are basketball aficionados and who've never seen a highlight of that game, you should look it up on YouTube. One of the great playoff games ever played. Michael Jordan had a triple-double in that game. Scottie Pippen was dominant in that game. Scottie Pippen was dominant in every game in that series other than Game 4 when Jordan had 54. Pippen was dominant. One of the worst decisions that the Knicks ever made was letting Xavier McDaniel leave their team after 92. There are very few occasions in sports history when a player leaves a team and is equally as bad for that player and that team. And Xavier McDaniel leaving the Knicks to go play for the Boston Celtics hurt him and the Knicks. Had the Knicks kept Xavier McDaniel and Mark Jackson, they would have had a far greater chance to beat the Bulls in 93 than doing what they did, which is trading Mark Jackson to the LA Clippers for Doc Rivers. As a matter of fact, I think that they traded Mark Jackson to the LA Clippers for Doc Rivers and Charles Smith. So they must have packaged another player from the Knicks to get both those players. I'm trying to remember how exactly that went down. If one of you brothers remember the particulars of that situation, please let me know. But yes, I remember very vividly that 92 Knicks squad took the Bulls 7 games, and they had physicality in the front court, and they had Mark Jackson running their offense. I think they wanted to get better on defense, so they brought in Doc Rivers, but it hurt them in 93 because Doc Rivers was not the point guard that Mark Jackson was. He just wasn't. They also lost Gerald Wilkins' defense because he went and signed with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the Knicks were better in some ways because Gerald Wilkins' departure allowed John Starks to spread his wings. But they were much deeper in 92. And I think that had they stood pat, no pun intended, with Pat Riley being their coach, but had they stood pat, they may have had a better chance to defeat the Bulls in 93 because throughout the 93 playoffs, Michael Jordan struggled with a very debilitating right wrist issue that hampered his shooting throughout those playoffs. His shooting would come and go, especially when he was playing against a team that was very physical. There was one point in the series against the Cleveland Cavaliers in 1993, a series that the Bulls swept 4-0. I believe it was Game 3, where Jordan would not even take a shot with his right hand if he was near the basket because he could not dunk the basketball. They had a breakaway where he purposefully went up and did a lean and dunk with the left hand because his right hand was too much. It was bothering him too much. Maybe it was Game 4. One of those games. One of those games in the 93 playoffs, Jordan refused to attack the basket with his right hand because of that right hand / right wrist issue that he had. And by the way, that's what players do when they have an issue with their wrist. They don't go to the basket and throw alley-oops to themselves and ram the basketball through the rim as hard as possible. But that's neither here nor there. Oh yeah, here it goes. After he was spotted at an Atlantic City casino in the wee hours before Game 2, Jordan shot 12 of 32 as the Knicks took a 2-0 series lead. Those games in the Garden were very intense. Game 1, Michael didn't shoot well. Game 2, he didn't shoot well. As I stated, he had issues with his shooting all throughout those playoffs because of a right wrist injury that he suffered during the regular season. And it was aggravated in a game against the Detroit Pistons in the regular season where Jordan had a breakaway and Dennis Rodman pulled him down out of the air and Jordan landed on his right wrist. His right wrist was never truly the same for the rest of that season. But as the author here is listing, as I already stated, Jordan had 54 points in Game 4. He had a triple-double in Game 5. Great game. The Charles Smith game. And then, of course, against the Phoenix Suns, he averaged 41 points a game, still a record. Number 6 is Shaq in 01. I'm just going to scroll through these now because we went through the top 5. We already know what Shaq did against the Dikembe. Basically had the same stats that he had in 2000. 30.4 points per game, 15 rebounds, 3 assists. Almost identical stats. Wow. Number 7 is the great Hakeem, the Dream Olajuwon. Arguably the most skilled center in NBA history. As I've stated, every player that I have in my top 10, you can argue is the greatest player at their position ever. Outside of that, from 11 to 15 or 11 to 20 are some of the all-time greatest players in NBA history that you really can't argue are the greatest at their position. You just can't argue it. Like, you can't argue Isaiah Thomas. You can't really argue Dr. J. You can't argue Kobe. You can't argue Jerry West, Oscar Robertson. Some people might try to argue Oscar Robertson, but no. Magic is discernibly more accomplished than him. And the fact of the matter is that certain people will say, well, Oscar played with Kareem for 4 years, I believe. I believe that his first year there was the 70-71 season. And his last year there was the 73-74 season. So they played 4 seasons together. They got to 2 finals. And they won 1. I believe in 74 they lost to the Boston Celtics, which was Oscar's last season. Magic Johnson played with Kareem from 1980 to 1989. And they got to, 7 or 8 finals? I believe the only years, that Magic missed in the finals while Kareem was on his team was the 81 finals when Moses Malone got there, and the 86 finals when Hakeem got there. Mind you, both Hakeem and Moses Malone are above Kobe on my list. You brothers are going to find that my list is very consistent, man. I don't bullshit with you brothers, and beyond that, I don't lead with my emotions. So it's very hard to find cracks or faults in my list, man. This is how I go. But Hakeem was unbelievable. Awesome player. Second best player of the 1990s, particularly the first half of the 1990s. From 1990 to 1995, Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon was without a doubt the second best player in the NBA after Michael Jordan. And as I've stated, Charles Barkley loves to talk about the 1993 finals against Jordan and use that as an excuse for why he didn't win a championship. The fact of the matter is that Charles had 2 years while Jordan was gone to win his title, and he came up short both years against Hakeem. Hakeem Olajuwon is, as far as I know, the only center in the history of the NBA to get over 200 steals and 100 blocks in the same season. Hakeem Olajuwon did that. A center with over 200 steals. If I'm wrong about that, one of you brothers, please correct me. But I know that Michael Jordan did it at least twice. He did it in 87 and 88, where he had over 200 steals and over 100 blocks. I believe that Pippen did it at least once, and Hakeem Olajuwon did it. Also won the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year in the same year. And Michael Jordan did that. I'm not sure if anyone else did that. I'm not sure if David Robinson did it in 95. But once again, you brothers can correct me on that if I'm wrong about that. I know that David Robinson was the MVP in 95. I'm not sure if he was the Defensive Player of the Year in 95, though. That might have been Mutombo, but I can't remember that. And when you think about Hakeem Olajuwon, also please understand that he was able to defeat Patrick Ewing in the finals in 1994. He was able to defeat Shaquille O'Neal in the finals in 1995. He was also able to defeat Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the conference finals in 86. So when you're talking about a giant slayer, you're talking about Hakeem Olajuwon. He also defeated David Robinson in the playoffs in 95. So all the best centers in his era, he beat them all. We see LeBron James in 2016 again with his cry face on when they robbed Golden State in that series. Let's see. The great Moses Malone, who's also arguably the most underrated all-time great player in NBA history, right alongside Tim Duncan and Bill Russell. He was able to dominate Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson in the 83 finals, where they swept the Lakers. As you can see, he averaged 26 a game, almost 16 rebounds a game, almost 2 blocks a game. This guy had 11 straight seasons of averaging 20-plus points and 10-plus rebounds. Moses Malone did. And won, I believe, 3 MVP awards. At least 2, but I believe he won 3 MVP awards. One of you brothers can correct me on that. We see LeBron, 2013. When you look at LeBron's numbers are good. But it hasn't been until the last 3 years that he started to put up these astronomical playoff numbers, which is kind of the reverse of what you would expect. Normally, players put up these big astronomical numbers in their mid to late 20s, and then in their early 30s, they start to taper off. LeBron, for some strange reason, is one of the few players, really the only player in NBA history, who's astronomically better on offense in his early to mid 30s than he was in his mid to late 20s. I mean, just look at his points per game here. 26 points per game. This year he averaged something like 35 points per game. So something is rotten in Denmark. We'll leave it at that. Larry Bird, 1984. As I've already stated, Larry Bird is better than Kobe Bryant. A lot of cats might not like that. Larry Bird was a greater all-around player than Kobe Bryant. Larry Bird was a greater overall player than LeBron James. Okay? Larry Bird was a better outside shooter. He was a better mid-range shooter, better three-point shooter, better free throw shooter, better left-hand finisher than LeBron, even though I'll give LeBron credit. His last 2 years in the NBA, he's become an elite-level left-hand finisher. Larry Bird was a better passer than LeBron. He was a better rebounder than LeBron. He was a better clutch performer than LeBron. I'll give LeBron credit for this past season where he's taking great strides in his clutch performances. But Larry Bird, for his career, was a greater clutch performer than LeBron James. The only thing that LeBron has on Bird is that he's a far greater natural athlete. and he was better guarding one-on-one than Larry Bird. That's what I'll give LeBron James. But I'm not sure if Bird ever has had a season where he was as bad defensively as LeBron was this season. In the 84 postseason, he averaged almost 28 a game, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, over 2 steals, wow, and over 1 block a game. Bird's best outing came in Game 5 of the conference semifinals as Boston closed out New York behind his 39 points, 12 rebounds, and 10 assists. Was it Game 5 that they closed out the Knicks? I thought that series went 7 in 84. One of you brothers can correct me on that, but I believe that series went 7. Because if I remember correctly, the home team won every game. And Larry Bird went to war against Bernard King. And that's what a lot of people, once again, don't understand. The greatest era in NBA history for small forwards was in the 80s. Okay? LeBron James and Kevin Durant pretty much only have each other. Back in the 80s, you had the most all-time great small forwards who could fill it up back then. You had Larry Bird, you had Dominique Wilkins, you had Mark Aguirre, you had Alex English, you had Kiki Vandeweghe, James Worthy, guys literally all over the NBA that could just straight up fill it up. Bird in 86 again. We're going to scroll through this. Oh, Tim Duncan again. You notice all these players that we're seeing are all above Kobe on my list. Shaq again. So we have all 3 of Shaq's Laker championship runs in the top 14 greatest NBA playoff performances. We still have not seen Kobe Bean yet. Where is Kobe Bean? This is where Shaq started to tail off just a little bit. We saw his previous 2 playoff performances. He averaged just under 31 a game and just over 15 rebounds a game. We see here he's at 28.5 points per game, a little bit under 13 rebounds a game. Even his assists dipped just a little bit. He's always somewhere around 3 assists. Here he's at 2.8. So this is the first inkling that we have that Shaq is about to trail off. This was his 10th season. This season right here. And this was the season where he and Kobe became more of a partnership than a Batman and Robin. Even though Shaq was still the better player, as we could see, he won the Finals MVP. Number 15, Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade, as I've stated, Dwayne Wade is closer to Kobe Bryant than Kobe Bryant is to Michael Jordan. I've stated that unequivocally. I have no doubt about it. Dwayne Wade in his prime, before his body broke down due to him throwing himself on the ground, he was closer to Kobe than Kobe was to Michael Jordan. And at Dwayne Wade's absolute peak in 05 and 06, you can make the case that he was as good as Kobe Bryant ever was. And certain people may not like that. But for those 2 seasons, you can make the case that he was as good as Kobe ever was. Dwayne never had the absolute green light, carte blanche, to take whatever shot he wanted like Kobe has had throughout his career. You can make the case that Dwayne had that one season, I believe in 09, where he had the green light and he averaged about 30 a game. But anyone who remembers Dwayne Wade's performance in the 2006 playoffs, really even the 2005 playoffs, when he got hurt in the conference finals against the Detroit Pistons, the Heat were the better team. But unfortunately for them, Dwayne Wade went down with injury. And then in 06, he was just dominant. Even with the referees helping him out, he was just unbelievably dominant. And probably the most explosive shooting guard that I've seen in the NBA in regards to 1 foot leaping and being able to finish with one hand over any big man in the league at the basket, while also having a diversity of post-up and mid-range moves since Michael Jordan. Because even Kobe did not have the ability to move the ball in the air with one hand like Dwayne Wade had. Let's see here, 28.4 points per game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists. Great performance. We'll see LeBron James again this season. $34 points a game, 9 rebounds, 9 assists. Now, we've already looked through some of LeBron's other great seasons where he had nowhere near the offensive output. This guy is 33 years old, and he's having the most proficient and efficient offensive outputs of his career. Number 17 is Michael Jordan, 1992. Honestly, I think that this season should be far higher on the list. Let's see what they have to say here. Jordan averaged 34.5 points a game, 6 rebounds, almost 6 assists, 2 steals. The longest of Jordan's championship runs at 22 games saw his second highest scoring average in a title year. It came out of Price. Jordan was much more prone to turnovers, which bumped him out of the top 10. Okay. Jordan had big moments throughout the postseason. He dropped 56 on an overmatched Miami squad to complete a sweep and came through with 42 points in a blowout after the Knicks forced a Game 7. I will never forget that second round matchup against the Knicks in 1992. They totally shocked the Bulls. They won Game 1 in Chicago. Patrick Ewing dominated. He had something like 31 points and like 12, 13 rebounds. He was toying with Bill Cartwright. Bill Cartwright, for those of you who don't know, was the center for the Bulls, who actually was traded to Chicago from the Knicks, where he and Patrick Ewing used to go at it in practice all the time. So Bill Cartwright was able to defend Ewing better than most in the league, but Patrick Ewing had a stretch from about 87 to about 93, 94, where he was basically unguardable. He was a stretch 5 back in the early 90s. He was a player who could shoot out from 20, 21 feet. And he also had great post moves. His problem was he became a little bit too jump shot happy as his career went along. But the Knicks won Game 1. The Bulls were able to win Games 2 and 3. Game 4, the Knicks won, but that was back in the era where they used to play back-to-back days in the playoffs. A lot of people might not remember that. There was a time period in the NBA playoffs where they would have teams play each other back-to-back days, especially in the second round. You would play Game 3 and 4 back-to-back on a Saturday and a Sunday. And oftentimes, it would hurt that road team, because they might have won Game 3 and then Game 4, they're exhausted. They can't win Game 4. I think the NBA did that on purpose to help the underdog in the second round to make the series more exciting. Because oftentimes you would end up having series tied at 2 apiece after 4 games just because the road team was dead tired in Game 4 and they had just won a Game 3. The defining memory remains Game 1 of the NBA Finals versus Portland, when Jordan hit 6 3-pointers in the first half against rival Clyde Drexler. That's why to this day, Clyde Drexler, when you see him on Undisputed, he's talking about LeBron James is better than Jordan. Why is he saying that? Because he and Jordan had a very major rivalry throughout the mid-'80s through the mid-'90s, where they were trying to see who was the best shooting guard. And everybody knew that it was Jordan, but Jordan viewed Drexler as a threat, as he should have. That was an era of great shooting guards. The NBA today is just starting to produce more prominent shooting guards. When you look around the NBA right now, how many great shooting guards are there? You have Klay Thompson. You have DeMar DeRozan. You have Bradley Beal. If you want to call James Harden a shooting guard, you kind of can, but he's more of a combo guard because he handles the ball so much. But there's not many great shooting guards. Back in the mid to late 80s, you had a lot of great shooting guards. So, in the same way that the point guards in today's era have rivalries all over the league, the shooting guards back then had rivalries with each other all over the league. Reggie Miller and Joe Dumars, Reggie Lewis, Michael Jordan, Byron Scott, Vernon Maxwell, John Starks. The list goes on. Hersey Hawkins. A lot of great shooting guards in the league back then. Hell, Sidney Moncrief, even though Sidney Moncrief retired in the late 80s, he was a great shooting guard as well. Great shooting guard. Jeff Malone. Look up some of these guys' stats. Just about everybody that I named had at least 4 to 5 seasons where they averaged at least 20 points per game in an era dominated by the big man. The last sentence here says Jordan finished the game, that was game 1, with 39 points and averaged 35.8 points per game in the finals. Number 18, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the Lakers, 1980. This was Kareem pretty much at the end of his absolute prime. (1980) postseason, he averaged 32 a game, 12 rebounds. Wow. If not for an ill-timed sprained ankle, Abdul-Jabbar might have placed in the top 10. Abdul-Jabbar rolled his ankle in the third quarter of Game 5 of the NBA Finals against the 76ers. Though he came back to score 14 points in the fourth quarter of the win, swelling prevented Abdul-Jabbar from traveling back to Philadelphia for Game 6. Magic Johnson moved to center in his place, led the Lakers to an improbable win, and claimed Finals MVP honors despite Abdul-Jabbar averaging 33.4 points, 13.6 rebounds, and 4.6 blocks in the 5 games he was able to play. That's crazy. This guy averaged 33 points and almost 14 rebounds and didn't get the Finals MVP. Let me say this. For those of you who've never seen highlights to that Game 6, go watch Magic Johnson's performance. This dude, Magic Johnson, in that game, Game 6, he was so fast. We're talking about a guy 6'8", probably at that time about 220, 225 maybe, but about 6'8". This dude's handle was so tight. He can get around anybody, finishing at the cup with both hands, double pumping in the air, laser passes. People have to understand something about Magic Johnson before you say LeBron James is better than him. Magic Johnson won the championship on 3 different levels in 3 consecutive seasons. He won the state championship his senior year in high school, I believe at Everett High School. Then he goes to Michigan State, wins the world title as a freshman, then declares for the draft after 1 season in college and wins the world championship with the Lakers. He won the championship on 3 different levels in 3 straight seasons. I'm not even sure if anyone else has ever done that. I believe Bill Russell did that. I believe he won the state championship, then won the college championship, but I don't think he did it in 3 consecutive seasons, because I know that he was in college for more than 1 season. I believe he was in college for all 4 seasons, but he was able to win the championship on all 3 levels. Magic Johnson won it on all 3 levels in 3 consecutive seasons. I don't think anybody else has ever done that. Magic Johnson of the Lakers, 1987. I was just talking about you, bruh. There he goes, battling with his twin, Larry Bird. I personally believe that they may have both been MK programmed and twinned with one another, but that's another video for another day. When you look at their numbers, you can also tell that there was some affinity between them, most likely psychologically implanted. Larry Bird stated that he used to look at Magic Johnson's stats after every game, compare them to his, and after Magic Johnson retired, he no longer felt compelled to play in the NBA anymore. That's why he retired 1 year after Magic Johnson left. 1987 postseason, Magic Johnson, 21.8 points per game, 7.7 rebounds, 12 assists. Magic was so dominant from the 86-87 season until his last year with the Lakers, his last full season with the Lakers, the 90-91 season. A lot of people don't know, in Magic's last year with the Lakers, they did not have Pat Riley as coach. They did not have Kareem. He still led them to the finals. People love talking about LeBron James. Magic Johnson led a team with no Kareem to the NBA Finals in the Western Conference, and they were not the favorites to defeat the Portland Trail Blazers in the conference finals. But they were able to do so because of Magic Johnson's magnificence. Fittingly, Johnson's best postseason run puts him right behind Abdul-Jabbar. In 1986-87, Johnson replaced the aging captain as the Lakers' go-to guy. That was on full display in the NBA Finals against the rival Celtics, as Johnson averaged 26.2 points, 13 assists, and 8.2 rebounds. To beat Boston in 6 games, wow, look at those stats. 26 points, 13 assists, wow, 8 rebounds. To beat Boston in 6 games and earn MVP honors, Johnson's junior skyhook won Game 6 of the series at the Garden, and he had 3 playoff triple-doubles, though surprisingly none in the finals. He goes LeBron James in 2017. This is when he started to rise to another level offensively. 33 points a game, 9 rebounds, 8 assists. Oh, Steph Curry. Steph Curry's at 21, and we still haven't seen Kobe Bean. Look at this. In the 2017 postseason, Steph Curry averaged 28 points per game, 6 rebounds, and almost 7 assists. This man almost averaged a triple-double in the finals in 2017. Steph Curry is a player that people love to try to diminish for whatever reason, whether it be because he's not an outstanding natural athlete or what have you, or people feel like he came from the suburbs and there's some favoritism behind him, or he had an NBA dad, all this bullshit. A lot of players have NBA dads. They don't end up like Steph Curry. And as I've stated in other videos, he is without a doubt, one of the top 5 most impactful offensive players that I've ever seen, and I'm sure in NBA history. And not just because of the shots he takes and makes, but because of his proficiency. This is a player whose range extends out to 35 feet, and he still is always going to shoot somewhere around 50% for the season. Curry took a backseat to teammate Kevin Durant as the Warriors beat Cleveland 4-1 in the finals to claim their second championship in 3 years. But earlier in the postseason, with Durant missing 2 games due to a calf strain, Curry was the man. He narrowly missed posting a 50-40-90 playoff run, shooting 49.5% from the field, and per Basketball Reference, his .659 true shooting percentage was second only to James's in 2014 among players who were used on at least 30% of their team's plays in the postseason. Steph Curry, once again, is one of those players that people are not going to realize how potent he was offensively until he's no longer in the league. I actually think that he'll be missed in the NBA more than LeBron James will, because I think that LeBron James has a Wilt Chamberlain element to him, where his physique and his athleticism are so alien to the common person that they have a hard time relating to him. Whereas with the Steph Curry, he's much more likely to inspire many of the people who are going to partake in the NBA a generation from now. Oh snap, here we go. We finally got the Kobe Bean. We finally got the Kobe Bean Bryant. Kobe Bryant, Lakers, 2009. He's 30 years old. Okay. 30 points per game, 5 rebounds, almost 6 assists, almost a block a game, almost 2 steals a game. Bryant earned his first championship as a go-to guy with his best postseason run. After a tough series with Houston's Shane Battier, who held him to 14 points in Game 7, Bryant was nearly unstoppable the rest of the way to the title. He averaged 34 points, including a pair of 40-plus efforts, against Denver in the Western Conference Finals. Bryant started the NBA Finals versus Orlando with a 40-point effort and handed out 8 assists in 4 of the 5 games. Yes, that was by far his greatest playoff run. By far. And as I've stated, Kobe finally learned how to be a great overall player in the NBA in regards to helping his team starting in the 2007-2008 season. That's when he was no longer just an extremely talented Jordan imitator and shot jacker. He actually became someone who could excel within a team concept. That's the difference between Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. I've had many of Kobe Bryant's fans come on my channel and say, well, how could Kobe be the best imitation of Michael Jordan but not be in your top 10? I don't know, you tell me. I can have a great leather jacket and then go find a pleather jacket that looks very similar. Does that mean that pleather jacket is near in value? No. It's fake. It's fabricated. Kobe's an all-time great. But in regards to his understanding of the game and how to utilize his teammates, that started in 07. That's when that started. And I don't want to hear he played with bums because he had great players in the early 2000s. He ran them off because he wanted his own team. Then he wanted to claim that he was a victim of not having enough talent around him. Kobe Bryant was the basketball equivalent of the chick that's 30 years old and talking about there's no good men because she spent all her 20s chasing after degenerates when she had a good dude when she was 19, 20 years old. That's what Kobe Bryant's ass was back in the 2000s. He had a good team, ran them off, ended up dealing with scrubs, and then finally was able to find the right fit for him. So, once again, Kobe Bryant has only had the 22nd best NBA playoff performance of the last 40 years. So, that only just verifies many of the statements that I've made about Kobe being a great player, but is he as good as Jordan or Kareem, Bill Russell, Magic, Bird, Hakeem, Tim Duncan, Shaq? Notice, all these guys that I named are all above him on this list of the greatest playoff runs. LeBron, all of them. Moses Malone. It's almost like, damn it, they watched my list and their metrics still came out the same as my list. The only player that I have above Kobe on my personal list that has not made an appearance on this all-time greatest playoff run is Isaiah Thomas. And Isaiah Thomas is like 6 feet tall. He wasn't going to go out there and average 30 a game back in the late 80s. They didn't let 6-foot guards do that back then. You couldn't do that back then and be on a team that had a realistic chance to win the NBA championship. You just couldn't. The teams back then were too smart. Now, Allen Iverson, in the early 2000s, he could do that back then. He could have a chance to advance a team all the way to the finals, jacking up shots, and his teammates just playing great defense because the teams in the Eastern Conference were dumb. They were going against the Milwaukee Bucks led by Ray Allen and that nut job Sam Cassell. Sam Cassell was a very nice player, but he was also very dumb. If they had a smarter point guard, they would have beat the Philadelphia 76ers. The Indiana Pacers were old by that time. The Vince Carter-led Toronto Raptors, they really should have won that series, but Vince Carter, being the mama's boy that he was, decided that he was going to go pick up his diploma as opposed to letting his mother pick it up, and he concentrated on the game, and it cost him in Game 7 because he missed that final shot, and had he had his head more in the game, that game may not have even been close at the end. The Raptors may have been able to win that game. But That's just another reason why Vince Carter was never going to be another Michael Jordan. He never really wanted it that bad. He was more concerned with being a mama's boy. The great Isaiah Thomas stated that in 1986, I believe it was, or 87. 87. He graduated from Indiana University because he was a Hoosier. And he did not go pick up his own diploma. He didn't go to the graduation ceremony because he wanted to concentrate on the playoff series that he was in against the Hawks. That's the difference between Isaiah Thomas and Vince Carter. That's the difference. That's why one player, Isaiah Thomas, first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest players of all time, probably number 11 on my list. And Vince Carter is going to end up being a player who goes to the Hall of Fame. He's going to end his career with somewhere around 24,000 points. And he'll be known as one of the most exciting players in NBA history and a high flyer, but never a champion. But anyway, I made my point. Kobe Bryant, all-time great. Number 14 on my list. And this list of all-time greatest NBA playoffs performances also reflects that. So peace.